Well, this is Dave at the Floodwood High School. Just going to show you today to pack a bearing. You've got a dust cover on your bearing. They're going to be hammered on, and to get it off, you just have to take a rubber mallet, tap around it, loosen it up, and as it starts to go loose, because they can be rusted on, take a channel locks, pop it off. Once you get that off, there's a cotter key that's in there, and running horizontally, it's got a nut on it that's a crown nut. Straighten out your cotter key, pull your cotter key out. I had already straightened it, and then you have a nut on there. Pull the nut off, and you're going to get grease all over. As you can see, the nut, maybe you can't see, but the nut's got a bunch of slots in it. It's called a crown nut, and it allows you to place the cotter key through, so that way when you tighten it up, the nut can't fall off, causing you to lose your tire. And all we're going to do is we're just going to pack one bearing, our outer bearing, just to show you how. So there's a washer that comes off. On the washer, there's a peg on it, and the peg slides over the axle shaft and a line there. And that's what holds your bearing on. And you can test your bearings. There's an inner race and outer race. And when I was turning them, they turned real nice, but hold them, you can see that they turn nice, that they're not damaged in any way. This is a bearing packer. Never used it before. Have no idea how it's going to work. It's supposed to be a cleaner process, but we'll see. And it's just a matter of putting there's a grease zerk here, a hole down here. It's a matter of putting your bearing on it, tightening the cap back on, and taking your grease gun, and ideally you have bearing grease, taking your grease gun and just start pumping grease into the bearing. I don't see anything yet. Okay, so now as I pumped grease through, now the grease is coming out. I don't know if you can see that or not, but as I was pumping, the grease is coming out, so it's packing grease between the inner and outer race of the bearing, and now our bearing is packed. We could have taken the bearing and cleaned it up, put it in some even diesel fuel, and cleaned it up and redid it. But as I said, these bearings are new. I'm just checking it out. So we place the bearing back on. Actually, before I put the bearing on, I was going to pump a little bit of grease in the cavity So I'm just gonna fill the cavity up. Then I'll push the grease ideally back. To the back bearing. We'll place our bearing back on there again. Push it on. Take the washer, line it up with the slot so the washer now can't spin. Place your nut on. And usually the nut turns fairly easy. And just tighten the nut. Fairly tight like that. Go back about a quarter turn. Okay, you don't want your wheel to be seized up. And then put your cotter key back in. Remember, it's horizontal. That's where we took it out of. Okay. Cotter key back in. Bend it so it can't come out. Wipe some of this excess grease. It's falling off the edges off. And tap your dust cover back on. You hear a little grinding on that. There is actually brakes on these tires. And that was my concern when I first raised it up and I spun it and I heard some grinding, thinking, oh, I better check the bearings out. Well, it was actually just the brakes that were bad. The bearings were okay. So that's pretty simple. If we were going to do the other side, there's a outer seal. You'd have to tap the bearing out and the seal out, and possibly have to, if we do that, possibly would have to replace that seal. And that's why I didn't want to go that far today, because I don't have any seals or bearings with me. But that's real simple to do. You jack it up, pull off the dust cover, pull the cotter key off, remove the nut, pull the washer off, wiggle the tire, the bearing will fall off. You could pull your tire all the way off at that point. So, just a quick lesson. So just to recap, my purpose I didn't mention before. One of the reasons I jacked this up, going on a trip, about a couple hour drive, and I just wanted to make sure my bearings were good. Last thing you want to have happen after I get a couple animals in here, a couple hours away, whether it's with a horse trailer, boat trailer, camper, is to have a bearing go out. So I jacked it up. One way just to check to see if your bearing is, you have to have it jacked up off the ground so your wheels are free. Grab your tire and wobble it. And when I raised it up, I told you when I spun it I could hear some grinding. And I could also, the tire was there was a little bit of play in it. And that's why I wanted to check the bearings out. I thought the bearings were already replaced. I had someone do that a couple of years ago. So I jacked it up, and when I pulled the first dust cover off, I realized, yep, based off the grease that was in there, I knew the bearings had been replaced. So I wasn't worried about pulling the whole tire off, changing the bearings, packing the rear bearing, because I knew it was already packed less than 2 years ago. But since I had it off, I did pack the front bearing, push some grease inside of it. The ideal thing to have on here would remove these dust covers and put what's called bearing buddies on. And the bearing buddies have a sleeve and a spring in there, and it pushes the grease to the back inside between the two bearings. And as you fill it up, you use a grease gun. It has a grease zerk on it, and you fill the bearing buddies up until that you'll see that collar being pushed out. This is the only trailer I have that doesn't have the bearing buddies on it. I just haven't put them on yet. I don't use this once or twice a year, so it's not a big deal. But I said before you go on any trip, you should check your bearings. It literally took about maybe at most a half hour to check all 4 tires on here. So all you need is a jack, a rubber mallet, a channel locks, a grease gun with some bearing grease, possibly a screwdriver, a flathead screwdriver, just to help you get the cotter key out. And that's all the tools you need. And it's real simple. Spin the tire, tapping on the dust cover. Once the dust cover is off, remove the cotter key. Once the cotter key is off, remove the nut. Behind the nut is a washer that's got a peg in it that slides on the bearing, or on the axle. Then after that, you have the outside bearing. You have an inner and outer bearing on both sides of the tire. On the other side, you've got a bearing. But like I said, we didn't get into that because I didn't need to. So I hope that helps explain a little bit. Just some simple maintenance to do. You should always check this out, especially before you go on long trips. Ideally, like fishing, before the beginning of the season, if you're going to do take your boat a lot of places, check your bearings out. Just jack it up, wiggle the tire, make sure it's got grease in it. Put bearing buddies on. You can buy them at any automotive supply place. They're really easy. They tie up on. You just got to know the diameter size. There's a couple different sizes, and that's it. And then you can always make sure you have grease in them. And if you have a boat, make sure you're using marine bearing grease, because the tires, axles, bearings will get submerged in water, so you got to make sure you have marine grease. Otherwise, the grease won't hold up. So I hope that helps. Like I said, it's real simple. Anybody can do it.